Powell also got some questions on Bitcoin, and I thought a very interesting response was Powell dismissed Bitcoin, and he said, well, Bitcoin is just used for speculation like gold. So in other words, Powell said that gold is only used for speculation, that there's no difference between Bitcoin and gold because the only reason people buy gold is to speculate. Now, I guess Powell doesn't understand that there's an entire jewelry industry that uses gold. Jewelers are not speculating when they buy gold. They're making jewelry. There's also an entire industry that uses gold for other things, like conducting electricity and all sorts of properties that make gold very useful. Bitcoin doesn't have any of that. The fact that Powell doesn't understand that gold's an actual commodity that has a use, and by the way, there are a lot of central banks and foreign governments that hold gold as a reserve asset. They're not holding Bitcoin, they're holding gold. You would think the chairman of the Federal Reserve would understand some of the intrinsic value of gold and not simply say it has no value, that it's exactly the same as Bitcoin, when there is a world of difference between gold and Bitcoin, and the chairman of the Federal Reserve should know that. Now, there were some Republicans that would try to get Powell to admit that all the Biden spending is helping to drive inflation. Of course, they never want to talk about all the Trump spending that also helped drive inflation, but they're trying to pin Powell down, and he doesn't want to acknowledge that. But he did reluctantly admit that government spending was one of many factors that was contributing to inflation, but he then often tried to downplay that in terms of other things. He also got a question on the dollar's status as a reserve currency. And this answer really was ridiculous because he was asked what would happen if the dollar lost that status. It was no longer the reserve currency of the world. And according to Powell, it's no big deal. He said if the dollar lost its reserve currency status, that in the short run, we wouldn't even notice the difference, that it would be no big deal, that nobody would even know that the dollar was no longer the reserve currency. He thought in the long run it could diminish our stature. He wasn't sure what the implications would be, but he pretty much was confident that it didn't even matter whether we had that privilege or not, which shows you how clueless Powell is regarding the U.S. economy, because the entire foundation of this bubble economy is built on that privilege. In fact, when he was speaking with the U.S. Senate, he spoke about how the U.S. economy was weathering the COVID crisis a lot better than other economies, that we were a lot stronger. And the only reason that that's the case, and it's not real strength, because look at our trade deficits and our budget deficits, we were just able to go deeper into debt, to run bigger deficits, to postpone the consequences because of the dollar's status as the reserve currency. But for that status, we would not have been able to rely on that crutch. And it's amazing how Powell takes that whole status for granted. The fact that we could print money and import real stuff. Because if the dollar wasn't the reserve currency, we couldn't do that anymore. So we couldn't import $1 trillion a year worth of stuff that we didn't produce. We'd have to produce it ourselves. The ramifications for the dollar's losing its reserve currency status are catastrophic. And Powell says that we wouldn't even notice the difference. And also, when he was comparing inflation in the U.S. to inflation around the world, he acknowledged that in general, America has higher inflation than other economies. But he attributed that to the greater strength of our economy. That yes, we have more inflation, but it's only because we have a stronger economy. When the reality is, if we had a stronger economy, we would have lower inflation, because stronger economies are more productive economies. They increase supply, and so you have lower prices. It's weak economies where you have less production, where you have higher prices. But an even more ridiculous answer had to do with monetizing the debt, because one of the congressmen asked Powell about debt monetization, and was the Federal Reserve now going to admit that it's monetizing the debt? Because remember, Ben Bernanke back in 2009 told Congress that we're not monetizing the debt because we're only buying the debt temporarily and we're going to sell it back into the market. And of course, here we are in 2022 and all those bonds are still on the balance sheet plus trillions more. So you would think Powell would admit, okay, I guess we are monetizing the debt, but he repeated the same lie that Bernanke told. He said that the definition of debt monetization is when a central bank buys debt with the intention of holding it. But he said the Federal Reserve is not buying debt with the intention of holding it. The Fed is buying debt with the intention of selling it because the Fed is going to shrink the balance sheet. Well, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Who cares about what you intend to do? What matters is what you actually do. And clearly, the road to debt monetization is paved with good intentions because that's what the Fed is doing. It doesn't matter if they intend to shrink the balance sheet. What matters is it's not shrinking. It continues to grow. And even if they start shrinking it like they did when it was $4.5 trillion and they shrunk it down to about $3.5 trillion, what difference does that make if now we're at $9 trillion? If you only shrink it a little bit and then you expand it even more, you are monetizing the debt.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
I have bad news for you. If you're not rich by now, you're screwed. And if you're in debt, you're even double screwed. How so, you might wonder? Well, the sad truth is that you're working your whole life to make someone else rich. The mega corporations, the banks, the politicians, everyone is getting richer. They get your money. And what is even worse, they get your time, they get your life. You are not even in a rat race. You're in a financial prison. But what could a solution for you look like? Honestly, I don't know, but I know what a solution for me would look like. It's very simple. I use whatever money I have and I multiply it with 1,000. This could make my life much easier and probably yours as well. If you have $1,000 available and multiply this with 1,000, I believe that this could solve some financial issue for the one or the other. Of course, if you're ugly, you would have to multiply it with much more than 1,000. My name is Marco Stan, and this is what I decided to do. I decided to 1000x my money. This is not a joke. I know what you may be thinking. What is this guy talking about? How should this work? This is not possible. Well, I made a detailed video where I laid out my plan. And some clever folks might even want to look at this plan and copy it and do exactly what I do. This is just a little hint on the side. You have two options. You leave, you forget what you have seen. You do whatever you're doing and you hope that somehow you get some other results. Good luck with that. Or you click the link below the video. You enter your email address because I'm not showing this to everybody. You at least watch my video on how I plan to 1000x my money. The choice is yours. Make the right choice. Join me. See what a different future you could have. See at least how I plan to do the 1000x. So click on the link below, enter your email address, and I see you on the other side. Your Marco Stan.